This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Getting the show started is Justin Waggoner, K-State Extension beef cattle specialist, as he reviews the recent Focus on Feedlots report and what data points are starting to show consistency. Anthony Zukoff, K-State Extension entomologist, continues the show, chatting about webworms and what their favorite food source is and what damage they can do to growers' fields. K-State Extension horticulture expert Matt McKernan ends the show, saying how providing adequate watering is one of the most important factors in determining the success or failure of a lot of young trees and shrubs. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our show discussing the recent Focus on Feedlots report with K-State Extension beef cattle specialist Justin Waggoner. Justin, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Shelby.
Justin, as a reminder for every month, what is Focus on Feedlots?
Sure. So always good to orient everyone back to the Focus on Feedlots and really what this effort at K-State here is about. So the Focus on Feedlots is essentially a survey of feedlot operations that are predominantly located in the western half of the state. We record a variety of feedlot performance as well as some closeout information on those cattle, cost of gain, as well as some commodity prices. And so this is an effort that we've been doing for a number of years at K-State here. Data actually has a historical data set going back to the 1990s. So pretty unique data set that's got a really strong trajectory here at K-State.
And what time frame of data are we talking about today?
Yeah, so we put the reports out monthly. Oftentimes we're a month behind. So if you think about financial numbers and financial data, so this is actually the July report that would be representative of June cattle closeout numbers.
And when I was comparing the two most recent reports, talking about this data now, the number of steers seemed to make a big jump to me. Is that the case?
Yeah, so there's always a few things that I think as you compare month to month within the Focus on Feedlots that oftentimes kind of raise some questions. And so if you go back to the May 26 closeout, we marketed a little over 14,000 head of steers. In the current June closeout that we're discussing, there was 19,000 steers marketed. And so we see a substantial increase of about 5,000 steers being marketed from that time span from May to June. Actually, if we look at once again, that historical data set within the Focus on Feedlots, average steer marketings are around 17,000 head within the data set for really this time period. So I would say we were a little lower in May of 2026 in terms of the total number of cattle marketed, but we probably made up for that a little bit as we get into those cattle that were marketed in June of 26. So a little higher number there. But not outside the ranges that we would maybe expect to see based on the historical context of the Focus on Feedlots.
And as we look at the weights then for this closeout information, are you starting to really see some consistency when it comes to final weights?
Yeah, I think that's a good topic to point out. One of the common topics in the industries right now has been feedlot exit weights and days on feed. And so over the past 2 years, I'm going to say we've just continually seen cattle exit weights on both steers and heifers. It wasn't uncommon to see those just continue to trend upward. And I think this last year, especially in 2026, as we get the last 6 months of data here in the Focus on Feedlots, we're really starting to find some consistency to where feedlot exit weights for steers are right around that 1,500 to 1,525 range. If we look at the heifers, those have been very consistent in that 1,350 to 1,370 range this month in, month out. So I really feel like as an industry, we're starting to find that consistency in terms of exit weights. I certainly don't see those continuing to trend upward like they had for the majority of 2024 and 2025.
And what consistency then are you seeing when it does come to average days on feed?
So in terms of average days on feed, the working number that I think the industry is starting to settle around is for both steers and heifers. We're looking at average days on feed in the industry of somewhere between 190 and 200 days on feed. Obviously, 190 would be the heifer number. 200 days would be the steer number. Now, it is important to recognize that there is a pretty wide range here. If we look at steer, average days on feed, we're going to be in that 180 to 200 days on feed. If we look at the heifers, we're around that 170 to 200 days on feed. So a little wider range in terms of days on feed for the heifers, but certainly in terms of the exit weights and days on feed, I think as an industry, especially if we think about the numbers that we've captured here in 2026, we're certainly starting to find some consistency there in the reports.
As these feedlots do find more consistency, is that a positive when you think about, or is there any benefits or downfalls to kind of having a normal?
Well, I think just to your point, it really kind of maybe gives us an indication of, okay, what is the new norm, right? And how high are we looking to stretch these exit weights and days on feed? And so, obviously just as we put this out there next month, the exit weights may come in 100 pounds heavier. I doubt that'll happen. But oftentimes when we think we've reached the peak, we may find a new threshold that we cross over. But I think as an industry, that kind of tells us where maybe the new target is for right now in terms of current economics, corn prices, and all of the factors that go into how long we're actually going to put a pen of cattle on feed, cattle performance. There's a host of variables that oftentimes go into that model for a particular feed yard.
What are a few other key data points in this Focus on Feedlots report?
Yeah, sure. So, as we think about just cattle performance, we can kind of start to go through that. So we talked about the steers. Obviously, we saw an increase of about 5,000 head on the steers this month, marking just a little over 19,000 head, 14,000 head on the heifers. In weight's really consistent here in somewhere between that 7 to 8 weight type animal that's being placed. 777 on the steers, 744 on the heifers. Final weights, we discussed that 1524 this month in the June 2026 closeout for the steers, 1355 on the heifers. If we look at that average days on feed, steers was 205 days with a range of 179 to 260. So obviously some longer day steers represented here in this data set as well. 189 on the heifers with a range of 169 to 208 days on feed. As we get into the performance numbers, fairly strong performance for a June closeout, 3.58 average daily gain on the steers, 3.15 on the heifers. Feed conversions, 6.3 here on the steers, 6.72 on the heifers. Death loss, 1.56 and 1.78. Those numbers are actually fairly good in terms of what we would call for the Focus on Feedlots. I think right now in the industry, anytime in aggregate, we're below that threshold of a 2% death loss. I think that's something that we need to be cognizant of the industry. So cattle performance, death loss, very strong here as we move through the late spring, early summer months. Will be interesting to see as we start to get into some of these later summer closeouts and the impacts of heat stress in the cattle feeding industry in terms of, as we look forward as when those cattle will close out, what does that number actually look like and how big of an impact do those heat stress events really have on our cattle feeders here in the state of Kansas? As we get into some of the cost of gain numbers here, steers 101.56 was our average cost of gain. For the steers, 107.98 on the heifers. That is about a $3 lower. Projected cost of gain, and this would be cattle that would be placed on feed in the month of July. So we are a little bit behind there, but 106 for the steers and just over 110 on the heifers. In terms of our commodity prices, average corn price reported by the feed yards mid-July was 481. That's about 25 cents higher than where we were at in that May report. That would be reflective of June corn. Ground alfalfa hay, very steady there in the 160, 137, with a range of 113 to 225. Obviously, hay prices tend to be very much supply and demand oriented. So as we get into these later months, we know a good chunk of the state of Kansas obviously has seen some impacts of drought. So we may see that hay price start to reflect some of that supply and demand as we get into these later months. And obviously some movement here as we get into the late summer transition and we start to have conversations about corn harvest.
Justin, you mentioned this as a historical data set. And so how does receiving this information from feed yards help you with research and understanding the industry?
Yeah, so great question. I think one of the really strong aspects of the Focus on Feedlots is that historical perspective that it gives us. We always have to remind ourselves that it is a survey. So it does get reported in. But as we look back, one of the things that historical data set does is it really allows us to identify those long-term trends. We talk a lot about exit weights, and that's really a great example. Much of the conversation around exit weights in the feedlot industry really focuses around the last 2 to 3 years. But if you look at the Focus on Feedlot data set, we've been increasing exit weights of both steers and heifers steadily since the early 1990s at a rate of about 7 pounds of live weight per year. So we've been on that trajectory for a much longer period of time. And so as you think about some of those increases and being able to identify those long-term trends and really where the industry is heading, I think that's really one of the strong aspects and the value of something like the Focus on Feedlots.
That was Kansas State University Extension beef cattle specialist Justin Waggoner discussing his recent Focus on Feedlots data. If you are wanting to find the most recent report or take a look at the historical data that comes with the Focus on Feedlots, there are a few different ways you can find this information. One of them is by following the link in today's show notes on agtoday.net. You can also simply go to the internet and search for K-State Focus on Feedlots, or you can also navigate to it by going to K-State's Animal Sciences and Industry website. That website is www.asi.K-State.edu. Once again, that is asi.K-State.edu. If you're wanting to find out more information from K-State's Extension Beef Team, you can do that by going to ksubeef.org. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show talking about webworms with K-State Extension entomologist Anthony Zukoff. Anthony, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Shelby.
Anthony, what is a webworm?
Well, a webworm is a small caterpillar of a boring brown moth that folks are seeing right now out in a variety of plants, particularly pigweed.
Pigweed, is that really a problem if they're eating them?
No, actually. So I've had comments and calls from a variety of folks in the last week. They're very happy that the pigweed's getting decimated by this webworm. So this webworm has a lot of different hosts out in the environment. It's kind of a generalist, but it really does like pigweed. So a lot of pigweed stands are getting destroyed and effectively controlled in some cases by webworm. And so that's not a problem. The problem is arising because as these webworms destroy all this pigweed, the pigweed tends to be associated along crop edges and maybe into crop fields. And as the webworm destroys the pigweed, they're jumping to other hosts. And in this case, they're starting to cause a problem for alfalfa fields in western and central Kansas. So once the pigweed is eaten away, or maybe it's been sprayed out by the producers, these webworms are jumping to another host, which is alfalfa. And of course, that could be a problem.
Any reason that you know of why they prefer the pigweed?
This particular species just in general likes broadleaf plants of all kinds. Like I said, they're generalists, not specific to pigweed. It could be that pigweed is very abundant in the landscape, has a lot of biomass, so there's a lot of food for these caterpillars to develop on. So just maybe an easy target, but they do historically seem to gravitate towards pigweed first.
How are they decimating them?
Well, they're caterpillars, so they're eating. They do all their damage by straightforward eating plant material. So the caterpillars start out very small, like all caterpillars do. The larger they get, the more they eat and the faster they eat. So once you start getting a mature caterpillar, they're consuming a lot of leaf material every day. And so they can easily get rid of plants from the top down, so to speak.
How big do these worms get?
This particular species, you might see caterpillars reaching maturity about an inch or so. Once they start to get to that size, they'll start to pupate and emerge as moths.
If they've destroyed pigweed beside an alfalfa field, what damage are they then going to do in that alfalfa field as well?
The same kind of thing. So what they're doing in the pigweed, like I said, they're just consuming that plant material outright. When they're really young in pigweed and in alfalfa, you'll start seeing the damage present as skeletonization at first. You might have a leaf that's not completely consumed all the way, but enough of it's consumed where it looks very lacy, skeletonized. And you'll start to see that showing up in the upper canopy of the alfalfa field as well. So skeletonization of leaves. You'll also see a very distinct webbing that's associated with this pest, hence the name webworm. The caterpillars do spin their own webs, and they'll kind of bind up the terminals of alfalfa plants, so all the leaves will kind of get scrunched together in that webbing. And the caterpillars using that webbing as kind of a little microclimate, so it's a little bit of protection from the elements, from predators, things like that, even potentially from being sprayed. So you'll notice skeletonization and webbing in the alfalfa field. And I've seen images from folks recently where the plants are taken down to the stems and there's no leaf material left. It can be very dramatic.
And you mentioned they're like generalist. And so do you see this in other crops as well?
Not particularly out here in Kansas. Alfalfa is the main risk. Soybeans actually can be another risk. If you have soybeans in an area where webworm is blowing up, you might watch the beans as well because they can cause some issues there.
How are we controlling or managing them?
Luckily, there are a lot of products available to control webworm caterpillars. If you're looking at alfalfa in particular, scouting that field, maybe you see pigweed in the area that's been skeletonized and there's a lot of webworms, you're going to want to scout that alfalfa field. If you have 25% of your terminals that show webbing and you're seeing active caterpillars, that would be threshold. So you're going to want to make a treatment decision. If you can cut that field very soon, that should take care of your problem. However, if you've got 25% or more plants with terminals that have webbing and caterpillars, and you're not going to be able to cut for a couple weeks, you're going to want to probably make an application of an insecticide, of which there are quite a few out there that will work.
Does cutting it kill the worms, or does it just make them move on to somewhere else?
Yeah, it'll kind of a combination of the cutting action and windrowing might kill some caterpillars outright, but once that plant material is cut and starts to dry down and dies, those caterpillars will be leaving looking for living material to consume. They'll need living tissue to eat, to develop on.
If a grower catches it in pigweeds, have you seen them able to kill all the worms in the pigweeds so they don't per se make it into the alfalfa field?
I have not seen that. And again, when you're thinking about seeing a large infestation in that pigweed, whether the caterpillars themselves control, so to speak, that pigweed, or the producer comes in and kills the pigweed, those caterpillars are jumping to another host soon after. So whatever's in the area that's at risk and living, those caterpillars will try to eat. So they'll have to keep that in mind if they choose to, quote unquote, burn down their pigweed or cut it back. Those caterpillars will be looking for something else. And so they're going to want to switch their focus onto the alfalfa field and make sure they're not going to get to a problematic situation.
Do webworms migrate in, or are they a pest that if they've been in that field previous years, they're more likely to be there again?
They can overwinter to some degree. They can be moved in from weather currents as well. They have multiple generations in the state of Kansas. So right now, August through September, we're looking at generation 2 and 3. And those are the generations that are the most concerned for alfalfa and soybeans this time of year. So there's multiple waves of potential issues. And this is a pest where it's a very infrequent problem on this scale. Every year, the webworm is going to be present to some degree. Most years, they're not going to be concerned agriculturally speaking. You might see an outbreak like this every 7 to 10 years is what I'm gathering from folks I've been talking to.
Any other thoughts for growers?
So when you're out there scouting and say you're in an alfalfa field and you see 25% of your plants have that webbing, I want folks to look at those plants closely and look at the caterpillars. If you're not seeing any caterpillars at all, but you're seeing damage and webbing, it's possible that those caterpillars have already pupated and turned into adult moths, and so the feeding might be at an end and treatment might not be necessary. So that's something you want to take into account. So if you're out there and you're seeing a lot of young caterpillars still, there's still plenty of time for feeding, and you'd probably want to make a control decision then. So just as you're walking through the field, just take a minute to look closely at the webbing for active caterpillars.
A lot of times I feel like when we're talking about pests, we automatically think of crops, but do we often see a lot of pests being in weeds or being in those stretches beside crop fields?
Yes, actually. So a lot of our broadleaf weeds that are common along the edges of our agricultural production areas are hosts for a variety of different pests that can end up being problems in our row crops. And so when it comes to weed management, sometimes you're getting an added benefit of preemptively reducing potential pests later on in the season by controlling those weeds. So yes, our weedy plants can be alternate hosts and building up background populations of some of our pest insects. So controlling the weeds can help control insects in some cases.
Anthony, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you.
That was K-State Extension entomologist Anthony Zukoff. Before we cut to a break, we're now going to be joined by USDA's Rod Bain and USDA food safety expert Meredith Carruthers.
Along with the school supplies and clothes, food safety should also be a consideration for parents as they pack school lunches for their children. USDA food safety expert Meredith Carruthers says most important to remember from a food safety perspective, keep hot foods hot and cold foods cold.
What I find is a lot of people don't realize how many things are perishable and how important it is to keep foods cold, especially when we're talking about packing lunches for younger kids.
As youngsters, especially those under the age of 5, are more likely to get seriously sick from foodborne illness. So regarding proper chilling of perishable school lunch items in the lunchbox,
cold sources like ice packs, the frozen gel packs that can just go into the freezer and just pop into a lunchbox and go back in the freezer when you get home are great options. You can freeze a water bottle or a juice box. In theory, then it'll be thawed by lunchtime and your child can still consume it that way, using something to keep those foods cold, especially if they are perishable, like a sandwich with deli meat or any leftovers from the night before, or even the little packages of crackers and meat and cheese. Those need to be refrigerated.
What if you are packing hot foods for school lunches, say soup or chili?
You can use a thermos. When you use a thermos, very important to put hot water in it first to help heat up the inside and make sure it is already hot before you put hot food into it. And then those thermoses should help keep food hot until lunchtime.
And from the food safety perspective, a brown paper bag lunch is not the way to go.
Pack your child's food into an insulated container. For many different reasons, using an insulated bag is the way to go. It helps keep that cold air in, will help keep your food safe and cold for the appropriate amount of time until lunchtime.
Carruthers adds, if that for whatever reason, a parent is unable to keep a perishable school lunch cold,
there are plenty of non-perishable and shelf-stable items to eat for lunch or to send to school with your child or to take as snacks or anything like that.
Such as fresh, uncut fruit like apples or bananas. More back-to-school and school lunch food safety tips are available through USDA's Meat and Poultry Hotline. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. While water conservation should always be a priority, K-State Extension horticulture expert Matt McKernan says that watering is one of the most important factors in really determining the success or failure of a lot of our young trees and shrubs in the home landscape.
As we move more and more into the late summer months, we typically have a greater and greater need for providing some supplemental water and irrigation to our trees and shrubs to really maximize their growth and make sure that we are protecting our investment in the landscape.
The mature trees have a little bit of an advantage over the young trees.
They do. Mature trees also benefit from supplemental water during the summer months, but usually like once a month is more than adequate to be able to provide supplemental moisture for a large tree or shrub. It's really our newly planted trees and shrubs and those that are even really 5 years or less old in the landscape that are really going to benefit from this additional care because essentially they don't have a root system that's as well established into the surrounding soil. The more the root system establishes into the surrounding soil, the more water resources, the more nutrients, the more space that those trees and shrubs can pull from. But when it's dry and we have these young trees and shrubs that are still working on establishing a healthy root system, providing that supplemental water up close to the trunk and around the canopy is really going to be beneficial in maximizing their success. And so when we water, we want to make sure that we are not overwatering. That's probably one of the most common mistakes that we see. We want to make sure that we provide periods of time where the soil actually dries down because our roots need oxygen just like we need oxygen. So if the soil is constantly waterlogged or has standing water, we're essentially going to kill some of our root system on these trees and shrubs because the oxygen is necessary for the roots, just like it would be for the above ground portion of the plants.
So when it comes to knowing, I guess, where to locate the water and how much water is needed, how do we determine that?
Yeah. So with a newly planted tree and shrub, we're really primarily concerned about applying water near the trunk or the base of those trees and shrubs. If we think about it, that's primarily where the root ball is located when we plant it, and the root system is going to grow out from there. So the longer it's in the soil, the farther out that root system is going to reach. But when we're applying water, we really focus on applying it right at the base because that's where the majority of our root system is going to be at establishment and during those first few years of growth. When we start to water, we want to make sure that at planting we water thoroughly. We want to make sure that we're not only providing water, but we're settling the soil around the roots so we don't get air pockets. And then that first month, we're typically watering 1 to 2 times a week at least to really provide some supplemental water for the limited root system that's just in that container or the root ball that we planted. Once we get past about that first month, what we're looking to do is water at least once a week. Ideally, most trees and shrubs are going to benefit from about 10 gallons of water every week during the heat of the summer when there's not rain or other irrigation being provided. So it's easy to measure how much water we're applying in a couple of different ways. People can invest in a tree watering bag that zips up around the trunk. You fill it up and you know how much water you're applying every time you fill that bag. A low-tech way, but just as effective, is to take a 5-gallon bucket and set it at the base of the tree. Maybe drill 1 or 2 1/8-inch holes with a drill either in the bottom or the sides of that bucket so that the water is applied slowly so it has a greater chance of absorbing into the soil rather than just washing off. And we can fill that 5-gallon bucket twice a week. We can do it 2 times in one day, or we can do it on 2 different days of the week, maybe depending on the soil type that we have. If we have a heavy clay soil, we may want to try to do it all in one day. Or a sandy soil that drains quickly, we may want to try to apply maybe 5 gallons one day of the week, and then 2 or 3 days later, come back with that second 5 gallons of water. I would also highly encourage people to make sure they're mulching around their trees and shrubs as well. That's going to have many benefits in addition to conserving moisture. It's going to help reduce competition from turf grass and other weeds for water and nutrients in the soil. And it's also really going to be beneficial in helping us moderate soil temperatures and kind of insulate the soil from the heat of the summer. That's often going to evaporate a lot of that water a lot more quickly. So ideally, when we mulch, we want to put 2 to 4 inch layer of mulch over the root system of that plant. We want to be very careful, however, that we're not piling that mulch up against the trunk. Leave it a few inches away and mulch outward from there.
That's K-State Extension horticulture expert Matt McKernan with best management practices for watering young trees and shrubs in the home landscape. More information is available at all K-State Extension offices. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.